The Nakba didn't start in 48. The Nakba had decades and years of planning and scheming in place in order for the Nakba to take place the way that it did.
Taking center stage today is Nadim Bawalsa, a Palestinian historian and author whose work examines migration, identity, and the making of the Palestinian diaspora. His book, Transnational Palestine, looks at the early Palestinian communities in Latin America and how they forged a sense of national identity long before the State of Israel ever existed. Bawalsa explains how these early migrants fought for citizenship and recognition, and that the dream of returning to Palestine began decades before exile became the defining experience of so many Palestinian people. Nadim Bawalsa, welcome to Center Stage.
Thank you.
Your book, Transnational Palestine, Migration and the Right of Return Before 1948, looks at Palestinian migrants specifically to Latin America long before 1948, what's known as the Nakba. What first drew you personally to the subject?
So it was actually fortuitous. I was in the State Archive in Jerusalem in 2010, and I was looking for documents that would have helped me form a dissertation topic for my PhD. My hope was to construct an intellectual history of Jerusalem in the 1920s. And I spent a few weeks in the archive in Jerusalem, and it was quite frustrating. The documents hadn't been digitized yet, so they were all sort of disorganized in boxes that weren't properly labeled. And then I happened to come upon a document, and at the top of it, it had the word Mexico written in Arabic, and handwritten in Arabic, and the year was 1927. And so I thought, Mexico, 1927, why is this document in Jerusalem, in this archive? The document itself was a petition written to the government of Palestine, the British government of Palestine in Jerusalem, by Palestinian migrants in Mexico, demanding to be able to return to Palestine from Mexico, to be given citizenship in order to return to Palestine. And I thought, well, this is incredible. Why were there Palestinians in Mexico? Why had they had letterhead of the organization that they had created. It was called the Centro Social Palestino, the Palestinian Social Center of Monterrey, Mexico. And why were they demanding a right to return?
So it was that
Palestine.
Discovery of that letter with just that simple word, Mexico,
Yes.
that opened up this whole world for you.
Absolutely.
So what went through your mind?
I thought, this hasn't been written about. I had never heard, in my studies in graduate school, I had never heard of a Palestinian community in Mexico, let alone in Latin America. So I investigated further, and I found that, in fact, the largest community of Palestinians outside the Middle East and the Arab world is in Chile today. And I thought there must be a history behind this. And I wonder if this document that I found says something about struggles that they encountered to return before Israel was formed. Maybe there was precedent for excluding Palestinians from Palestine that the Israelis adopted once they formed their state. And that's in fact what happened. I found that there were Palestinian communities across all of Latin America and North America as well. And that as early as the 1910s and 20s, they were writing petitions and demanding rights to return and belong to Palestine legally. And so I went to Chile, where they have a very impressive collection of documents in their National Archive.
Through your research, could you tell why Chile, for example, has the largest population of Palestinians? Why did Palestinians go to these countries?
So what I found in the newspapers, so about over 10, so I think it was 12 or 13 different newspapers, periodicals published in Arabic and Spanish between the 1910s and the 1940s, written by the Middle Eastern migrant community there, so Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese, right? So what I found fascinating, not only was the existence of these newspapers, but just how much information they gave us about the daily lives of these incredible migrant communities that not only went halfway across the world and crossed the Andes to reach the Pacific Ocean, but they also created a society, a literate society that had a press, a functioning press, not just one newspaper, but 12. And so they were prolific and they were connected to each other all over the continent, to New York, to Sao Paulo, to Rio de Janeiro, to Peru. And they were also connected very much still to Palestine and to their families back home. So that seemed like a really important story to be told, this interconnection of Palestinian activism and identity formation in the early 20th century. Why Chile? And this is what was most fascinating. I had to ask descendants of these migrants or Palestinians in Chile today, why did your great-grandparents come here? And every single one of them said, because the landscape was almost identical to Palestine. The hill country, the temperate climate, the vegetation, the dryness, it was very reminiscent of, sort of the climate of the West Bank, where many of them would have left from. So Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahur, and so on. So that's the sort of the poetic environmental reason. The other reason is that Chile hadn't sort of been saturated with migrants yet. It wasn't as much of a hub as Argentina and Brazil were, so the competition was much less. And that's in fact why they managed to succeed so much to this day.
You uncovered also, as far as I understand, this remarkable letter from Mexico where a group called the Sons of Palestine pleaded to be recognized by blood, by culture,
Yes.
by history. Tell us about that. And when you read that, what did it make you think?
So that's a different document than the one I found in Jerusalem. I found that one in London, and I was really stunned to see that it was not the same organization that I had read about in the document in Jerusalem. So it was not from Saltillo, Mexico. It was from Monterrey, Mexico. And so there was another organization called the Hijos de Palestina, the Sons of Palestine, operating around the same time that this other organization was operating in another city. And I had to look up exactly how far these cities were from each other. And they're on that sort of the northern frontier of Mexico along the US border. They are over, 1,000 kilometers of Mexican desert terrain that the Palestinians had settled essentially over the course of the 1910s, 20s, and so on. And they organized these communities, these social communities, and they drafted these powerful petitions, and they demanded a right of return based on blood, lineage, a patriotism, and a desire to remain connected to the homeland. So
They were writing to whom?
To the British, the British government of Palestine in Jerusalem. So the British had colonized Palestine in 1917, in December 1917, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule, and then ushering in the British mandate for 30 years before the State of Israel was established. During those 30 years, they created a citizenship nationality law in 1925, through which they naturalized all the incoming Jewish settlers, about 400,000 over the course of 30 years. They naturalized them as Palestinians. They gave them Palestinian passports. All these Palestinian migrants who'd been leaving for decades, with Lebanese, Syrians, Armenians, Greeks, everyone was leaving in waves of migration to the Americas since the mid-1800s. These communities of Palestinian migrants were the only ones banned from acquiring the legal belonging or acquiring legal documentation that proved belonging to their original homeland, even though they continually came back. And it's because the British had a priority to naturalize incoming Jewish settlers. And so they literally would tell them, you're not Palestinian. You left as Ottomans when it was the Ottoman Empire. You don't qualify for Palestinian citizenship. We're not going to protect you. You may go to the Turkish consulate and seek consular support there, right? So the response of these Palestinians was absolutely not. We are and have always been Palestinians. Just because we had Ottoman documents a decade ago before you came doesn't negate that we are Palestinians.
So it didn't shift their sense of belonging to the land, right?
Exactly.
This response.
I think it
about them being
affirmed
Ottomans.
it.
Okay.
I think it cemented it, that if an imperial power has just taken over your homeland and you are at a distance living afar, and then you're being denied not only the right to return as a Palestinian, you're being told you're not even from here. You're not even Palestinian. what that did was, that's the argument of the book, is that it created this very powerful sense across all of these Palestinian communities, from Mexico to New York to Chile, of being, you know, undeniably and eternally Palestinian, right? And that's the first instance of seeing to what extent Palestinian identity was formed, sort of at this moment, the crucible of transitioning from empire to mandate to Israeli settler colonialism, and how throughout all of these decades of denial and forced distancing of the Palestinians, this cemented among them to this day the sense that no matter how much they try to deny who we are, where we come from, we are. Not only do we know because we were born there or our grandparents were born there, we know because the actual law, the international law, the rights to nationality are based on birth, residence, patrilineal lineage, your father's line. And so they continue to this day to use the language of international law to prove that they're Palestinians.
You've said that so many of these letters that were sent to London and your other European capitals were dismissed, as you described them, as noise, right? When you read these letters today and when you read them, what does this dismissal tell you about how Palestinian identity was silenced, even pre 1948, which could be quite shocking to some people who are unaware? And when you look at the situation today, is that something that you see is continuing?
What I found really incredible is that they not only were they dismissed as noise, they weren't even opened. Many of them were simply, thrown away as yet more documentation or more complaints, more grievances from those noisy communities.
Is that something you actually saw?
Yes. What I saw in terms of British sort of internal communications, in 1937, there was one British administrator who wrote to another and saying, we just received another petition from Palestinians in Salvador demanding their rights to nationality or to citizenship. What would you like me to do? His superior said, oh, we've been receiving these for years. Just reply to them the same thing that they replied 10 years ago.
Which was?
Which was, you are not considered Palestinians because you left when it was under the Ottoman Empire. You do not qualify. You've been gone for however many years. It was over 12 years. The absorptive economic capacity of Palestine does not allow for any more immigrants to come, right? Because they were giving the best land and resources to the incoming Jewish settlers, and these were simply undesirable migrants, the Palestinians. Sure, your parents and grandparents were born here, but they were Ottoman. Go to the Turkish consulate, see if they'll give you a travel passport or travel documentation or a nationality certificate. So those same reasons that they were, giving in 1927, they gave 10 years later. They didn't edit the document. They didn't see the new, they didn't see it in it sort of in the new context. So what they had been demanding for 10 years was dismissed in using the same exact language over the course of 10 years. I mean, that's how little these grievances mattered to them, right? And the truth of it is that not only are we actually from there, international law protects that we are from there. The 1924 Treaty of Lausanne confirms our legal rights to be in Palestine, not just the 750,000 Palestinians expelled in 1948, but the tens of thousands more who had left 30 years prior and were banned from return, and their descendants today as well, including myself and many others, have a right to belong legally to Palestine as Palestinians.
How much has the genocide, you think, in Gaza solidified that sense of identity and belonging amongst Palestinians?
I mean, in many ways, it's very disheartening. It's very dehumanizing. It's very exhausting to see that even in the midst of genocide and annihilation, we are still facing the same mechanisms of denial and so on. But what it's doing, and what I think it's really incredible, is that it's awakening humanity. It's not reawakening Palestinians or awakening Palestinians who happen to be across the world. It's awakening everyone, right? So what it means to be Palestinian today, in many ways, is about more than the Palestinians. It's about justice. It's about speaking truth to power. It's about confronting regimes of authoritarianism and police brutality, and so anyone taking to the streets is saying we are all Palestinian, right? We are all here to confront the same mechanisms of oppression.
Nadim, I'm curious about your writing process. You've touched upon this a little bit, how you collected evidence and how you researched the families that you've written about in your book. But how do you handle the emotional side of the story? Clearly, this is a personal story for you, something that means a lot. So, how do you handle that side while at the same time keeping yourself grounded in history?
So it wasn't an easy process. Absolutely, it was actually very exhausting, almost existentially, even sort of realizing just how long we've been struggling as a people, how long we've been denied in the same way, and how long international law even has been unable to protect us, right? So realizing these things while doing this archival research, whether in Palestine or the UK or Chile, what was taxing personally for me. In terms of how I went about it, well, thankfully I had incredible advisors at NYU where I completed my PhD, and so there was a lot of guidance from mentors who themselves were also Palestinians, whether they were at NYU or elsewhere. And so to see mentors who have been in the field for far longer than I have, uh, experiencing the same crisis and or the same questions and the same struggle, yet persisting, yet continuing, yet, that was always empowering.
What did it teach you about yourself?
In many ways, it taught me gratitude for what my family has been through, my grandparents, what they sacrificed, what they managed to achieve in order for our lives to not be defined by more loss and pain and war and dispossession, right? The stability that my grandparents, on both sides, both parents, the stability that they ensured for their kids and then their grandkids, us, as something that I can't take for granted. Even though they left Palestine, or they were expelled from Palestine, even though return is not an option for us at this time. What their flight, what their sacrifices, what their distancing from their homeland, the pain that they experienced, how that has stayed with them and been sort of inherited by their kids and by us. I'm so grateful to carry Nakba with me, right? It's an honor to carry that story and to be able to write about it, to speak about it, to teach about it as a professor, to publish about it.
For the new generation, what are you hoping your book, what sorts of conversations do you want your book to start?
Mm-hmm. First of all, what I found really fascinating about researching and writing this book is that very few Palestinians, whether in Palestine or in Chile and other parts of Latin America, knew about this history. No one had any idea that there was denial of return or denial of identity before 48. Not even the descendants of those who were denied. It was a story that sort of disappeared at some point. So, as many stories end up being sort of tucked away throughout decades of assimilation and sort of letting go of the homeland. But what I hope comes of this, and what I'm seeing is coming of this, is not only sort of an interest in seeing Palestine as a sort of a global transnational phenomenon, right? Palestine is everywhere. Palestine is in the Mexican desert, it's in the Chilean Andes, it's in the Peruvian Andes, it's in the Brazilian Amazon, it's in the Pampas of Argentina. It's absolutely everywhere, right? And these stories are so incredible and human, and what they have the capacity to do is sort of project backwards this struggle for justice to over a century. And what that does, I think, for many young folks, especially who are today so impassioned by Palestine, so driven by justice, what that does, I think, is just fuels this conviction that what needs to be done needs to be now, and it needs to be urgent, and this needs to stop. And I'll give you one little anecdote. I was giving a book talk at in Amman in Jordan a couple of years ago, and an audience member stood up during the Q&A, and she said that she identified as Mexican, and said that she had come to Jordan, expecting to had come to the lecture expecting to learn about Palestine and the Middle East, but that she sat through the lecture and learned more about Mexico than she had ever known, and that in one of the documents that I showed in my slides, she recognized her great-grandfather's name.
Oh,
Right, her
wow.
Palestinian great-grandfather who immigrated to Saltillo, and his name was on one of the petitions. And she said, Jesus Talamas, that's my great-grandfather. And she said, what do we do now? What do we tell us? What do we do now, right? There was a sense, it was the most incredible moment in my academic career to see that my book can have this effect, can bring us together in this way. And I said to her, as I'm just a lone historian, I can't tell you what to do, but what I hope this book does for you as a Mexican Palestinian in Jordan at this time is sort of activate for you this knowledge to go back to Mexico and tell your family about this history and show them the documentation, to go to your archives, to go to the archives in Mexico, to go to the archives in any country in Latin America. These archives are immense and they are treasure troves. Find these documents, learn Arabic, visit Palestine if you can, find out what these stories are, because what we need at this time as a people being erased and annihilated and genocided and denied over and over again and silenced, what we need more than anything is to realize just how many of us there are on this planet. We are everywhere. There are so many more of us than we've ever known, and many of us hold other nationalities and don't know that we have a great-grandfather or grandmother who was born in Palestine, and that entitles us to Palestinian nationality, right? So it's about activating this massive network of Palestinians the globe over, the world over, and seeing what can come of that, especially in this new digital age where everything is possible, where connectivity is taken for granted at this point. So connect Palestine to its Latin American roots, and connect Latin America to its Palestinian roots.
And you've raised this provocative question, what do we lose if we pin everything to 1948? What do you mean by that? And when was it that you first realized that the Palestinian story didn't start nor end in 1948?
So my focus throughout my dissertation and PhD work was always pre-48 Palestine. So specifically the transition from Ottoman to British rule around World War I. And so I was always convinced, and sort of through my readings of other historians' work and mentors and so on, that much of the foundations for what came to happen in 48 in terms of expulsion and dispossession and land theft and so on, the foundations for that were laid in the 30 years of British rule before the State of Israel was formed. So what I was fascinated by was to try to see in what ways 48 was made possible by British colonization. And so many historians have written about sort of how police brutality, British police and military brutality, and emergency laws and martial law. Many historians have shown how Israel has been using these same laws from the 20s and 30s and 40s in their occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and elsewhere across colonized Palestine. So for me, what was fascinating about finding this out, finding that there was expulsion and forced distancing and exile of Palestinians from Palestine before 48, was so groundbreaking for me to realize that not only are there massive communities of Palestinians across the world, the mechanisms, the legal mechanisms put in place by the Israelis to deny the right of return were actually in place well before the State of Israel was born. So they were just continuing a legal practice that was in place for 30 years by the former colonizers of Palestine, right? And so when we talk about Balfour, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, when we talk about the Nakba of 1948, these are seminal events in the history of Palestine, but so is 1925, so is 1936, so is 1946, so is 1947, right? Every year in the lead up to 48 is significant for understanding how and why 48 happened, right? So the Nakba didn't start in 48. The Nakba had decades and years of planning and scheming in place, right? In order for the Nakba to take place the way that it did. Expulsion, dispossession, forced distancing, sort of land appropriation, the denial of return, denial of Palestinianness. These things were very much in place for decades before Israel was born.
Nadim Bawalsa, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thanks.